It's almost the end of the year 2020. It has been such a crazy year for me, and I'm sure everyone has had a lot to go through. I'm sure we will all remember this year for years to come, because this year was not easy for any one of us. This year brought us all together even when we were quite far apart from each other. I feel like this year I learned more about the people around me, our community, our society, humanity, more than I've ever done before. If it wasn't for this pandemic, I don't feel like I would have read the Brothers Karamazov this year. So this pandemic definitely gave a boost to my reading. In today's video, I want to share with you all the best books I read in the year 2020 and also some of the worst books I read this year. I will be doing end of the year tag as well, in which I will be discussing all the books I read in the year 2020 in more detail. But today I just want to focus on some of the best reads of the year and some of the worst. I'm going to start this video with the worst books I read this year. I want to do that so I can go over them as quickly as possible so that I can move on to the good part of the video. I have 3 books which disappointed me this year. I'm not sure what it was exactly about these 3 books which disappointed me. These 3 books were out of my comfort zone. All 3 of these authors were new to me. Maybe I went in with some preconceived ideas about their works. Whatever the reason might be, I did not enjoy reading these books. So let's talk about the first book which I did not like, and it was Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. This is an American classic. In fact, all 3 of these books are classics which I did not like. I did not like Ethan Frome because I felt like the writer was trying too hard. I felt like the writer was trying to prove that she was a great writer, and in doing so she was losing the effortlessness which makes a book great in my eyes. I know many people love this book. This is a classic. There are a lot of people out there who have nothing but good words to say about Ethan Frome, but for me it felt a bit short. In fact, this is the lowest book I rated in 2020. I gave this a 2-star rating on Goodreads. This is also a very short book, just 100 pages long, and I feel like all the books which disappointed me this year were short books. One of my favorite books of all time is Animal Farm by George Orwell, and that is a short story. So I'm not against short stories per se, but I felt like this could have been so much better. The story was so dramatic, and it felt like, again, the author was trying too hard. And I'm not sure what I'll feel about Edith Wharton's other works. I've read the summaries of some of her other books, like The House of Mirth, and I feel like, I might like those ones better than I liked this one. I feel like her books have this theme of being sad and dramatic. Many of you guys have suggested her other works to me in the comments, and I definitely plan on reading some of her other works before I give up on Edith Wharton. I definitely plan on reading The House of Mirth, Summer, and The Buccaneers, I've heard, was an unfinished work which she wrote, and I've seen a television series for that which was really good, so I do want to read that someday. But her novella Ethan Frome didn't do much for me. I might also read The Age of Innocence, which won her the Pulitzer Prize. So there are definitely other works by this writer I want to read, and I feel like, the short stories or novellas might not actually portray the writer in the best light sometimes. So I definitely plan on reading a bit more of Edith Wharton, but Ethan Frome was definitely a disappointment. The second book which I want to talk about is Bonjour Tress by Francois Sagan. It is a modern French classic. It was just 100 pages long, but I did not like the story. I do believe that the writing was very simple and sort of poetic, even because of its simplicity, but the storyline just did not resonate with me. I haven't read a lot of French classics. I have only read The Black Tulip by Alexandre Dumas, and I feel like this is the second French classic I've read, and it wasn't what I was hoping it would be. Somebody messaged me the other day suggesting French classics. I do really want to read French classics. I mean, I want to read Les Miserables and I want to read Émile Zola. I'm pretty sure there's no comparison between Dumas and this book. I might really enjoy other French classics for all I know. I have no clue. If somebody was to start reading French classics, what would you suggest they read first? Something simple but interesting and intriguing. I feel like I need to slowly acclimatize myself to French classics before I dive into some major works in French. So I would be open to suggestions. I would love to hear them. This book I got from an old bookshop and I might return it back because I feel like I'm never going to read this again. The third book which disappointed me was John Steinbeck's The Red Pony. It is also a relatively modern classic. It is written by an American writer and this was the first time I was reading Steinbeck. The countryside in America was what was explored in this book. The writing again was fine. The stories were weird. I mean, they felt like, just your average normal day countryside stories, but then there was something really twisted in them which just threw me off. This young 10-year-old boy gets a present and then something really creepy happens, and it was just told in such a normal way. I'm not sure what to make of that. I have read a lot of creepy, weird books this year, but this one was just too twisted for me. Even though that was done in such a subtle way, it just felt odd. The way this 10-year-old boy tortures animals, I don't feel comfortable reading about stuff like that. Maybe his other books are not as bad, I'm not sure. Steinbeck is one author I'm not sure I'll enjoy. I will try and read more books by Edith Wharton, but I'm not too sure about John Steinbeck. I gave this one a 3-star because I did really like the way he was telling stuff. I did really like his writing style, but the stories were just odd. That's one word to describe this book. It was odd. Now that I'm done with the worst books I read this year, let's move on to the good stuff. I read 5 books which I rated 5 stars this year. I read 8 books which I rated 4 stars this year. I loved all the 5-star books I read this year, but I also genuinely really enjoyed some of the books I've rated 4 stars. But in this video, I'm just going to talk about the books which I rated 5 stars. So the first book which I gave a 5-star rating to this year was David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I was actually surprised that I really enjoyed this book because I felt like I was not going to enjoy David Copperfield. First, the name just puts me off. It's a guy's name and I knew that this was written loosely on how Charles Dickens' life was as a kid. It's semi-autobiographical in a way. I really enjoyed his other books. I loved Little Dorrit because the main character was female. I did not enjoy Great Expectations because it was all about a young boy called Pip. And I felt like this might be a bit similar to that because it was called David Copperfield. I knew that the whole story would revolve around this guy, but I actually really enjoyed this book. I felt like it had so much more to offer than Great Expectations. What I loved about this book was all the other characters beside David Copperfield because all those characters pushed him towards being the best version of himself. David learned from these characters. Some of these characters were super funny, eccentric. The whole book was just hilarious but sad as well. Many of the characters in this book had a very troubled life, but the way Dickens talks about how they deal with their troubles was done in such a comedic and, Dickensian manner. I really enjoyed reading about their struggles and how they coped with it because Dickens wrote about them in a very interesting way. Let me share a few good quotes from this book. There can be no disparity in marriage like unsuitability of mind and purpose. There is nothing that we have in common, said Annie. I have long found that there is nothing. If I were thankful to my husband for no more instead of for so much, I should be thankful to him for having saved me from the first mistaken impulse of my undisciplined heart. There are some really meaningful conversations happening in this book in between all the funny parts, and I felt like that made this book stand apart from all the other books I read this year. The second book which I absolutely loved this year was The Cranford Chronicles by Elizabeth Gaskell. I have read Wives and Daughters. I have loved reading that book. I love North and South. I wasn't a huge fan of Mary Barton. I found that book alright, but I did really enjoy The Cranford Chronicles. I read this at the very beginning of the lockdown and I was feeling so low. This book was about people coming together for each other. It was about people helping each other out even when, times were hard. And I felt like that part of it resonated a lot with me because we were in a lockdown. I wasn't able to go out from my house to meet people. There was something really sweet about this book. It was about people in a small town living together, their daily activities, how they were interlinked, how they gossiped about each other, but their hearts were pure. I feel like there are very few books which can show the purity of human nature the way the Cranford Chronicles did. There was a similarity between this book and some of the books by Thomas Hardy, because his books are about country folk who lead very simple lives as well, but their hearts are pure, their intentions are good, and I loved reading this. It was such a breath of fresh air. The next book which I absolutely loved was The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. This is written by an Italian writer and it was originally written in the Italian language. This was the only non-fiction I read this year and I absolutely loved it. One of my goals for the next year is definitely to read more non-fiction, and in order to achieve that, I have been buying more non-fiction. Coming back to The Prince, this was very short. It was just 125 pages long. It was very, very different from what I usually read, and you guys have an idea of my comfort zone when it comes to reading. I love reading fiction and I read classics from the Victorian era. It is sort of like a manual for a new leader. This guy wrote, I'm not sure about their names, but this guy wrote this book from a prison and he gave it as a present to the leader of Italy at the time. That's what I remember from this book. The way he talks about dealing with people, how to, manipulate leaders around you, how to take care of the army, how to use it for your own benefit. Some really cool tips in there. And it says that, many leaders read it. It is said that Cromwell read it, Napoleon Bonaparte read it, Stalin read it. It also has some darker aspect to it, and I feel like that can be misused and have been misused in the past, and some of those points might not be useful in today's world or won't work as effectively, but a lot of the things that Machiavelli talks about in this book are actually really good. So it's definitely worth a read, and if a person like me who is not really fond of talking about politics or anything of the sort, or armies or battles or anything like that, if I really enjoyed this, then I'm sure you guys will too, because the leader or the prince doesn't have to be the leader of a nation. It can be a leader of a company, it can be a leader of a business. You don't have to think of it in the bigger picture. You can just take the points from this book and use them in your life wherever they fit. So I really enjoyed this book. I wasn't expecting it to be as good, so this was a surprisingly good read for me this year. So the next book which I really, really enjoyed reading this year, and I feel like it just was a benchmark which I reached, it was the book The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. The year I read War and Peace by Lev Tolstoy, I felt like that was an accomplishment, and then reading The Brothers Karamazov was pretty similar to that. It felt like I achieved something this year after I finished reading The Brothers Karamazov. It took me 2 months to read it almost. Loved every bit of it. It was a very philosophical story. It was deep, it was weird, but it was very, very thought-provoking. Dostoyevsky wrenched out emotions from me which I did not knew existed. I was sad, I was worried about these characters. I felt like I was transported into their world when I was reading that book, and it was a very different world from where I live in. But I was there, Even though this book was worlds apart from where I live, from where I come from, but I felt for these characters, and I feel like Dostoyevsky accomplished that in a very, very wonderful way. I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, because even though it is a Russian classic, it's very different from Tolstoy's works. It's a thriller, it's a mystery. It has pages and pages about deep philosophical stuff which I never read about, but I was fascinated by when I was reading it. It felt very fast-paced, even though this is very long, more than 1,000 pages of this, but the thrilling parts of this book were very fast-paced. There were some parts about the church which I basically did not understand much of, but the parts which I did understand were very good. The story is about three brothers and their father. The father, Fyodor Karamazov, was a weird guy, and then you would expect his sons to be as weird as him, but his sons are actually very sensible men. There's Ivan, who is an intellectual person, then there is Alyosha, who is a very religious guy, and the third one was Mitya, who is very aware of his feelings, especially towards women. So you feel like you know these characters, and you read the next 100 pages and you're just like, whoa, that guy just changed completely, because there are so many aspects of a person. You cannot define a person by a few characteristics, and that's what Dostoyevsky is trying to explain in this book. For example, let's take Ivan. He is an intellectual, but he also has other parts of his personality. He's also a guy who can fall in love. He also has, a philosophical side, a religious side to him. There are parts of his personality which are clashing with each other, and that clash of philosophy and religion is what defines Ivan as a person. I can ramble about this book for ages, but I don't want to do that because I've already talked about this one a lot. I'm going to link all my videos in which I talk about the Brothers Karamazov down below, so if you're interested, you can check out my reading vlogs, my review about it. But definitely a stunning book. I wouldn't have read this book if it was not for this pandemic. And the last book, which I absolutely loved this year, was The Plague by Albert Camus. This book was originally written in French. This translation is by Stuart Gilbert. I believe there is a new translation of The Plague coming soon as well. I read this book because this was a classic about a pandemic. Not about a pandemic, but about an epidemic. But I absolutely loved this book, and if you haven't read it so far, I highly recommend that you read it now. Unlike my usual favorite books, this was very different. It was about this town in which an epidemic of a disease breaks out. That town goes into quarantine, how the people react to it. The people in the town initially don't believe that things are as serious as they are, or they don't want to believe. The characters in this book go through all the emotions which are pretty similar to what we all went through during this COVID pandemic, and the disease which spreads in this book is actually a fictional disease. It doesn't actually exist. In order to explain how good this book was, I would like to share a few passages from the book. From now on, it can be said that plague was the concern of all of us. Hitherto, surprised as he may have been by the strange things happening around him, each individual citizen had gone about his business as usual, so far as this was possible. And no doubt he would have continued doing so. But once the town gates were shut, every one of us realized that all the narrator included were, so to speak, in the same boat, and each would have to adapt himself to the new conditions of life. Thus, for example, a feeling normally as individual as the ache of separation from those one loves suddenly became a feeling in which all shared alike, and together with fear, the greatest affliction of the long period of exile that lay ahead. This book was mind-blowing, and it described the emotions of the people so accurately. Albert Camus was a genius. He knew about how people would react, how they would feel, what would go on in a situation like this, and he wrote it, years before this pandemic. He wrote it because he was inspired by an epidemic of cholera in Algeria, if I'm not wrong. I'm glad that, his words are preserved in the form of writing, because this will be a benchmark for all the books which are written about pandemics, all the fictional books which are written about pandemics. I know there are a lot of non-fiction on the market right now about pandemics. I was absolutely blown away by this, and I'm so glad I read it, and I highly recommend it to people. Read The Plague. You will not be disappointed, even though it's a sad book. But just read it. It's really good. Trust me on this one. So those were all the books which I wanted to talk about. I had some great reads this year. I also had a few terrible ones. I had a really good reading year. I'm very happy with what I read, because I read some really good books. I stepped out of my comfort zone, and I'm very happy about that. I enjoyed a lot of books I read this year, and there were very few which I did not like. I'll be talking more about all the books I've read this year in my future videos, and let me know if there is any specific video you guys would be interested in. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'm going to see you all in my next video very soon. Bye.